Part 1. Echoes of the Past. Maksym Kovalenko was a man who lived by the clock. His 32 years were woven from routine, like a well-tailored suit. Each morning began at 7 a.m., not a minute earlier or later. The aroma of fresh coffee from his favorite cafe near home, a news feed on his tablet, brief summaries of politics, economics, no sensations. Then, the commute to his office on Kontraktova Square, where his beloved numbers, tables, and reports awaited him. Maksym was an accountant at a reputable Kyiv firm, and his days flowed smoothly like a well-tuned clock. Order reigned in his world, and he found peace in it. In the evenings, Maksym read, mostly classics or non-fiction. Sometimes he watched TV series, but only those with a clear, predictable plot. Weekends were for rare meetings with friends, mostly in the virtual world. He was alone but didn't feel lonely, immersed in his cozy routine. Maksym never sought adventure. He believed that true adventures only existed in movies, and that suited him just fine. He didn't even notice the faint longing that sometimes crept into his thoughts, a desire for something he couldn't name, something beyond his ordered existence. One damp Tuesday, as autumn Kyiv wept with a fine, incessant rain, Maksym stood in the kitchen. The glass doors of the cabinet above the stove reflected his tired face. He was finishing boiling pasta, preparing for another quiet dinner. And at that moment the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. An international code. Maksym usually ignored such calls. Spam, a wrong number, or something else insignificant that would disturb his peace. But this time, some invisible force compelled him to reach for the receiver. Perhaps it was that elusive desire he'd never acknowledged, now begging to be unleashed. Hello. His voice, usually confident, was now slightly strained. On the other end of the line, through faint static, a woman's voice spoke. It was calm, professional, with a barely noticeable foreign accent. Mr. Maksym Kovalenko. My name is Anna. I'm an attorney from Oregon, United States of America. I'm calling about your grandfather, Mykola Kovalenko. Maksym froze, his hand with the phone suspended in the air. Grandfather Mykola. That name was almost a myth in his family. A legend whispered, with unspoken undertones. The very grandfather who, according to family lore, had gone missing during World War II. His photograph, a young and smiling man in an old military uniform, hung in his mother's worn album, a silent yet constant reminder of a lost part of the family, of the unspeakable pain his grandmother, and then his mother, had endured. My grandfather, but he's not alive, Maksym barely managed to utter, feeling his heart, which had been beating steadily until then, now begin to pound in his chest, as if trying to catch up with decades of silence. The air in the kitchen suddenly grew thick and heavy. According to our records, he passed away last month in Portland, Anna continued, her voice remaining calm despite the shocking information. And Mr. Kovalenko, he left you an inheritance. The receiver almost slipped from his sweaty palm. An inheritance. From a grandfather he'd never met, who was thought to be dead for over 80 years. This news was such a dissonance in his measured life, like a loud clap of thunder on a clear day. The walls of his cozy, familiar apartment seemed to suddenly close in, and the space around him no longer felt safe. Maksym's world, so orderly and predictable, suddenly trembled to its core. Part 2. Shadows of the Past. The first few days after the call were a blur, as if seen through a fog. The words, grandfather, Portland, inheritance spun endlessly in Maksym's head, pushing aside familiar numbers and formulas. He felt his stable, orderly world crumbling. It wasn't just shock, it was a profound sense of disarray, as if someone had rewritten the main chapter of his family's history. Maksym immediately called his mother. She answered with her usual slightly concerned voice. Hi, son. Everything all right? Are you sick? Mom, I just got a call. From America. About grandfather Mykola. A deep silence fell on the other end of the line, so profound Maksym thought the connection had been lost. Then came a sob. Grandfather. Mykola. But He died in the war. We received his death notice, son. Your father. He never mentioned him so as not to upset me. How is this possible? Her voice trembled, and Maksym felt the pain of decades past reawaken. His mother, who was only 5 when her father went to the front and never returned, had never fully recovered from that loss. For her, as for the entire family, Mykola Kovalenko was a hero who fell in battle. They told me he died last month. In Portland. And that he left me an inheritance. Maksym tried to speak calmly, but his voice also betrayed a tremor. His mother burst into tears, and Maksym heard her sobs escalate into full-blown weeping. It was a rare sight. His strong, always composed mother was now broken. This can't be true. Some kind of joke. He couldn't just disappear for so many years and not let us know. Her words were a mix of pain, hurt, and disbelief. Friends, whom he cautiously hinted about the strange call, reacted differently. Some joked about the American dream. Others advised him not to trust scammers. Be careful, Max, it could be a scam, his best friend Andrei warned him. But Maksym couldn't just dismiss it. The words inheritance and Portland were lodged in his mind. This was more than just money or property. It was a revealed secret, a ray of light piercing through decades of silence. He felt a strange, unfamiliar yearning for the truth. He contacted Anna again. She was patient and professional. She sent him numerous documents via email. An official death certificate, notarized papers, photos of a house in Portland, registry extracts. Everything looked painfully genuine. Maksym spent hours examining each document, searching for inconsistencies, but there were none. An online search confirmed Anna's law firm and its reputation. His grandfather, Mykola Kovalenko, a man believed to be dead, was indeed alive. And he had lived far away across the ocean. Maksym realized. This was not a hoax. This was reality. Uncomfortable, shocking, but reality. Two forces wrestled within him. Fear of the unknown, of this truth disrupting his orderly life, and at the same time, a wild curiosity, a feeling that this very event was the something he had always lacked. He had to fly to the U.S. Part 3. Journey into the unknown. The decision to fly to the U.S. was not an easy one for Maksym. His inner accountant, who so loved stability, fiercely resisted. But a strange feeling, a mix of curiosity and some unspoken obligation, pulled him across the ocean. It wasn't just a trip for an inheritance. It was an attempt to fill a void that had opened up in his family's history. Maksym gathered the necessary documents and applied for a visa. Each step felt like stepping out of his comfort zone. He requested leave from work, fabricating a story about urgent family matters abroad. His mother's face still bore a mix of pain and hope. She gave him an old photo of grandfather Mykola, taken before the war. Look, maybe you'll find something, son. I always believed he was alive. She whispered as Maksym hugged her goodbye. The flight was long. The clocks on his phone constantly switched, adding to a sense of disorientation. Maksym, who had never traveled beyond Poland, felt the world around him expand, becoming uncontrollably vast and unfamiliar. On the plane, he scrolled through pictures of Portland online. A green city by the river, against a backdrop of snow-capped mountains. It was so unlike his gray, autumn Kyiv. Portland Airport, Anna met him. She turned out to be a welcoming woman in her 50s, with kind but perceptive eyes and a light, genuine laugh. Maksym, so good to finally meet you in person. Her voice was as calm as it had been during their phone conversation. She immediately sensed his bewilderment and offered to take him to a hotel so he could rest after his journey. The next morning, after a restless night, Maksym met Anna at her office to discuss the formalities. She handed him the key to his grandfather's house. I know this might be a shock. Your grandfather was a very private person. He never spoke about his past. He left behind only this house and some unfinished projects. He was a talented carpenter. His daughter, your Aunt Maria, passed away a few years ago. She had no children. So the inheritance passes to you, as the only living relative from Ukraine. The keys in his hand felt heavier than all his accounting reports combined. Maksym set off for the house. It was located on a quiet street on the outskirts of Portland, nestled in a lush garden where autumn flowers were already blooming. From the outside, it was small but well-maintained, with large windows and a cozy porch. Stepping inside, Maksym noticed a peculiar scent of old age, paper, and something subtly familiar. It wasn't just the smell of an old house, but the aroma of a life that had spanned decades without his knowledge. The interior was tidy, but it felt as if a homeowner had just recently been there. Paintings hung on the walls, mostly oil landscapes depicting local mountains and forests. Hundreds of books lined the shelves, and Maksym was surprised to see that many of them were in Ukrainian. They were classic works, poetry, historical novels. His grandfather had not forgotten his language. Walking from room to room, Maksym came across a shelf of photographs. Among them, one immediately caught his eye. A young man, incredibly similar to Maksym himself, stood next to a smiling woman, and then with a small girl. This was grandfather Mykola, his second family. Pain and surprise pierced Maksym. Why had he never mentioned them? Why had his mother known nothing of a sister? This house was not just an inheritance. It was a repository of secrets, every object within it silently asking, what truly happened? Maksym felt that his journey was just beginning. Part 4. Whispers of the Old Diary. The following days, Maksym immersed himself in his grandfather's house, like an archaeologist on an excavation. Every item, every corner seemed a repository of clues. He touched the old furniture, crafted by his grandfather's hands, sifted through books, hoping to find something that would shed light on his mysterious life. His accountant's meticulousness, always directed at numbers, now focused on the pursuit of truth. One evening, while sifting through old tools in a small workshop attached to the house, it smelled of wood and linseed oil. Maksym noticed a strange unevenness in the wooden floor. Kneeling, he carefully lifted one of the planks. Beneath it, in a small recess, lay a worn, leather-bound notebook. It was an old diary. Maksym's heart pounded wildly. Carefully, as if afraid to crumble it to dust, he pulled out the diary. The first pages were faded, but the handwriting was clear, calligraphic. And it was in Ukrainian. June 22, 1941. It came as suddenly as thunder on a clear day. I am at the front. Thoughts of Maria and little Olenka give me no peace. Will I see them again? Maksym turned a page, then another. Grandfather Mykola wrote about the horrors of war, about losses, about despair. But then the tone shifted. 1944. I saw what I was not supposed to see. What cannot be told. Atrocities that cannot be comprehended by the human mind. I had to flee. Not for myself but for them. So they wouldn't be found, so they wouldn't suffer because of me. I had to die for them, so they could live. Maksym felt goosebumps prickle his skin. Grandfather hadn't died. He had staged his own death. He had disappeared to protect his family. From whom? From what? What had he seen? Following this were entries about his journey to America. About long months of wandering, about fear, about the new identity he had to forge. He wrote about how difficult it was to live with the burden of this secret, how he fought every day with the desire to return, but the fear for his loved ones was stronger. 1950 Portland. Found peace here. Even met Evelyn. She doesn't know my past. I can't tell her. Too dangerous. We had a daughter, whom we named Maria, after my first Maria. My little American Maria. I look at her and think of my Olenka. Is she alive? Does she remember me? Maksym felt a bitter lump in his throat. His aunt, Maria, whom the lawyer Anna had mentioned, was his grandfather's daughter from his second marriage. Grandfather Mykola had lived a double life, torn between two worlds, two families, two identities. He never forgot his Ukrainian family, but he couldn't return to them. The fear was too great. The diary wasn't just a story. It was a cry from the soul, a confession of a man who sacrificed everything for those he loved. Maksym read it for hours, forgetting time, food, the outside world. He saw not just words but pain, love, despair, and endless longing. He realized that his grandfather was not merely a soldier missing in action. He was a hero who chose the hardest path to protect his loved ones from the cruelty he had witnessed. And now, decades later, his secret had finally come to light. Part 5. Echoes of War. The discovery of the truth about grandfather Mykola was not just a revelation for Maksym, but an earthquake that shattered the foundations of his former well-ordered life. Kyiv, his stable job, his usual evenings with a book. All of it suddenly seemed distant and irrelevant. He could no longer simply return to his old habits, knowing the history hidden within his lineage. Maksym spent the following days immersed in libraries and online archives. He searched for information about the events of 1944 in Ukraine, events his grandfather might have written about. He read about Nazi crimes, Soviet repressions, and the activities of various underground groups. Every new fact, every horrific story he found, added strokes to the portrait of his grandfather, a man who lived with an unbearable burden. He began to understand that grandfather Mykola wasn't a deserter or a coward. He was a man who made an impossible choice to protect his loved ones from the cruelty he had witnessed. His silence was an act of love, not betrayal. This truth was painful, yet simultaneously liberating. Changed his perception of his grandfather, his family, and, most importantly, himself. Maksym, the accountant who lived in a world of numbers, now found himself in the swirling currents of history, where every event had a human face and every choice had irreversible consequences. He felt his own identity shifting. He was no longer just Maksym Kovalenko from Kyiv. He was the grandson of Mykola Kovalenko, a man who had lived a life full of secrets and sacrifice. And now, he had to decide what to do with this inheritance. Part 6. Weaving a new life. The revelation of the truth about grandfather Mykola was not just an epiphany for Maksym. It was a true earthquake that shattered the foundations of his former well-ordered life. Kyiv, his stable job, his usual evenings with a book. All of it suddenly seemed distant and irrelevant. He could no longer simply return to his old habits, knowing the story hidden in his lineage. His days in Portland turned into a period of deep contemplation. Maksym wandered the city for hours, inhaling the salty Pacific air, gazing at the green hills surrounding this amazing place. He imagined grandfather Mykola, who decades ago had walked these same streets, carrying an unspeakable secret. Every step was a testament to his silent sacrifice. And then Maksym understood. His grandfather's inheritance wasn't just a house or money. It was a story. And the untold part of that story, its burden and its wisdom, had now passed to Maksym. He felt a calling to tell this story, to give voice to those shadows of the past that had remained silent for so long. And perhaps not just this story but others too. Stories of people who changed their lives, found their place, or faced fateful challenges. He informed his mother of his decision. She, surprisingly, was understanding. The pain of losing her father remained, but the news of his life, of his sacrifice, brought a strange sense of peace. "You're his grandson, Maksym. Perhaps you're destined to continue what he couldn't," she said, and Maksym felt a blessing in her words. He asked Anna to help him with his residency documents. She was genuinely happy with his decision. "Your grandfather was an amazing man. I believe you will honorably continue his work." Her words were inspiring. Maksym decided not to sell his grandfather's house. Instead, he transformed his grandfather's workshop into his own studio. He began learning carpentry, finding strange comfort in it and a connection to the past. His grandfather's diary contained many blueprints and unfinished projects, and Maksym felt that by bringing them to life, He was somehow continuing a dialogue with his mysterious ancestor. But his main project became the Story Weaver channel. He converted one of the rooms in his grandfather's house into a small recording studio. Using his accounting skills, he meticulously planned the budget and technical aspects. His first story, of course, was the story of Grandfather Mykola, a secret that united 2 continents and 2 generations. He told it openly, sincerely, using the found photographs and diary excerpts, narrating them with his calm, but now deeply resonant voice. Maksym's life was no longer predictable. It became rich, filled with new acquaintances, members of the Ukrainian diaspora in Portland, local historians who helped him understand the complex events of the past. He found a new calling. Not just to count other people's numbers, but to tell real stories that inspire, shock, and make you think. Stories of resilience, of choice, of love and loss. He became a true story weaver, interweaving the threads of the past with his present, creating his own unique story that was just beginning.